Coming up next on the Channel 2 News at 6, Election Day in Chicago, a day for the history books with a record voter turnout. Harold Washington bidding to become Chicago's first black mayor. Bernard Epton hoping to become its first Republican mayor in 56 years. The polls close in just 1 hour.
And coming up, live reports on the mayor's race and the automatic runoffs. Plus, a look at the burning issues in the ballot in Chicago suburbs. And reaction from the voters at the end of one of the most hard-fought and bitter campaigns on record.
And in a few minutes, the results of our exit polls, next on the Channel 2 News at 6 o'clock.
Channel 2, WBBM TV, Chicago. Don Craig, Harry Porterfield, John Coughlin, and Johnny Morris with the Channel 2 News at 6.
Chicago voters standing in line, standing up to be counted in the race for mayor. Never have so many people voted in this city, and never have their votes counted for so much. Good evening from Channel 2 Election Headquarters. As you can see, Walter is joining Harry and me tonight for our election coverage. Almost 5.5 million people have voted in Chicago's race for mayor. They're choosing between the Democrat Harold Washington and the Republican Bernard Epton.
The polls will close in less than an hour, so let's get the final projection of voter turnout from Carol Kraus at the Board of Election Commissioners. Carol?
Harry, the turnout projection at this hour is 88%. Now, the numbers are so high that any predictions about what that means for whom are meaningless. The election is really up for grabs tonight. The numbers could total more than 1.4 million votes. The turnout is unquestionably of unprecedented proportions. They voted in big numbers on the west side.
Push this cart all the way in, or just how far do you push it?
Push it far as it goes until you get to the arrows.
On the south side, on the lakefront, and the northwest side. Even by noon, it was clear the turnout was making history in this election that is being watched by the entire world.
Historically, this is the highest turnout we've ever had, as far as we know, for a municipal election. It approaches the highest we've had for any election. In 1944, we had a 91% turnout for a presidential election.
The other big story of the day is here at Election Central at the Board of Election Commissioners. The extra attorneys hired to handle voter complaints have found themselves with time to spare.
Well, the complaints we've been receiving are about half of what we had in the primary, and we're very happy to note that fact.
The number of complaints has dwindled because of the massive effort by the Board of Elections and law enforcement agencies. There are Republican judges, Democratic judges, poll watchers watching the judges, a uniformed police officer watching the poll watchers and judges, and investigators from the state's attorney's office checking them all.
We all have our credentials on here?
Yes, we do.
You have credentials on, sir? Okay, are your credentials on file, sir?
Yes. There have been other spot checks by people from the Attorney General's office, the U.S. Attorney, and the FBI. U.S. Marshals are also standing by. This woman was scheduled to be an election judge in the 12th Ward, but was turned away.
We feel that it may be discriminatory because the other judge and myself are both Latinos.
Already, she has been interviewed by the Attorney General's office. Also in the 12th Ward, this woman had a complaint.
Once I voted my ballot, she took the ballot and she looked directly into the light and she can tell who I voted for.
And in one precinct, in the 9th Ward, they ran out of ballots at 9:30 this morning and were not resupplied until 1:30. Now, Mike Lavelle, tell us overall how clean has this election been?
Well, all our indications right now point to a very clean election, and I'm just hopeful that that's going to be the case. We really can't tell based on what we know now. We do know of some wrongdoing that's occurred. We met with Dan Webb earlier. You were present. He's going to be taking custody. He, through the U.S. Marshal's Office, will have custody of all of the records. If there was fraud there, I'm confident that it will be found and that the wrongdoers will be dealt with severely.
Are you willing to say you believe this has been the cleanest election in recent history in Chicago?
Well, I'd love to be able to say that, but I can recall the evening of November the 2nd saying that I thought that was a very clean election, and I was never shocked to the point of being staggered like that in my life within a few days after that election. So I'm just not willing to say that it is the cleanest election. I do think that all of the indications are that it was a very clean election, and we'll just have to wait to see to verify that.
Now, with 1 hour left to go, the projection for voter turnout is 88%. How firm is that?
I think it's very firm. I think it's based upon our latest sampling, and the 6 o'clock sampling is generally the one that is our most reliable projection. So I've taken and gone back historically, and while it's true that we've got dynamics here in this election that don't exist in others, at least based on the way we've been doing this over the years, it seems to me that we're going to be pretty firm at 88%.
Thank you, Mike Lavelle. Carol Kraus reporting live from the election board.
For the candidates, of course, there is nothing more to do now except wait for the returns. Philip Walters reports on the last day of the campaign for Harold Washington.
The strobe lights of several dozen news cameras flashed as Harold Washington prepared to vote for Harold Washington. He cast his ballot shortly before 8 this morning in Hyde Park. He said he would keep campaigning up until a half hour before the close of voting, stopping by various district offices, but without the pack of news reporters that has been crowding in on him for weeks.
Yeah, we feel good. It looks solid.
What have you learned in the past 5 months
What have I learned?
about yourself and the city?
I am really thinking about writing a book, and I'll need some pictures. Will you join me, Red?
What's that, sir? I missed it. Have you got a title in mind?
Barracudas.
The campaign of Harold Washington had been labeled disorganized, but the election day effort was not. It looked as organized and disciplined as the tightest ward organization ever fielded by the regular party bosses.
The duties of the team captains, first of all, will be to provide on-site supervision to student volunteers involved in precinct door-to-door canvassing operations.
Operation Push brought in 900 students from 6 state universities to beef up the Get Out the Vote effort.
And if you have any problems, just dial freedom, and we'll try to help you.
The question this evening, of course, is how's it going to turn out once all this volunteer effort finishes up. And we have a prediction out of Pat Caddell, pollster for Harold Washington. He's now saying 15 to 20% of the whites overall will vote for Harold Washington. That's about a 6% higher margin than he expected a week ago. He's also saying that the black voters, while making up only 40% of the total registered voting force, will actually account for more than 40% of the votes today because they are turning out so heavily. He expects close to a break even in the lakefront wards. He says the northwest side, which is considered Epton territory, is turning out a little more lightly than feared or expected. And he says the southwest side, also Epton territory, which is very heavy in voting turnout today, is only heavy in spots. As for the Hispanics, he says the turnout there is heavy in the areas of Hispanic wards where Washington has been doing the best. So all in all, he's very encouraged. The night before the presidential election, Pat Caddell told his client at that time, President Carter, that he was going to lose by 10 points. And that was the last presidential election. Today he talked to Harold Washington, and he wouldn't say what he told him, but would only say, nothing I said would be discouraging to him. So the outlook here is optimistic. Phil Walters, live at Washington headquarters.
Republican mayoral candidate Bernard Epton watched 2 contests today, his race with Harold Washington for the office of mayor, and the baseball game between the White Sox and the Orioles at Comiskey Park. Terry Hamzer reports.
Bernard Epton went to the polls in a Rush Street movie house. After casting his ballot for the man he called the best individual in the race, he said the sunny weather on Election Day was a lucky break.
I feel confident. I wouldn't say that I'll feel a lot better after the votes are counted.
While the votes were coming in, Epton went out to the ballpark, Illinois House Speaker George Ryan, to root for the White Sox. Governor Thompson was there too. He predicted an Epton victory because of the large voter turnout and because of what the governor called Harold Washington's campaign strategy error.
I think it was a mistake for Washington to bring in all those national Democrats. I don't think they're going to help it. Other politicians can help you raise money, but people don't vote for Epton or Washington because somebody else tells them to.
Epton tried to keep his eye on the ball and on his 2 grandchildren who were with him. But when the talk turned from baseball to ballots, he refused to take victory for granted.
Everybody's taking for granted that a large turnout is good for me, but no one knows what the voter will do in the polling booth.
While the candidate turned his attention to baseball, his supporters out in the precincts were keeping a different kind of score. Voter turnout in the predominantly white areas where Epton must do well well to win the election.
Hi, we just want to remind your mother to come over to vote tonight.
Okay.
Should be able to come over?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. We'll be open until 7 o'clock today.
All right, thank
But
you.
we need her help, okay?
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Some precinct workers in the 38th Ward did not have many doors to knock on this afternoon because many voters came out earlier on their own.
I'll get about 480 votes for Epton in this precinct.
Out of how many?
Out of 503.
Thanks for coming out.
This Northwest Side neighborhood is a bastion of lifelong Democrats, but precinct captains in this ward will be surprised if the Democratic nominee gets any more than 6% of the vote this time. This is Epton country.
We had about 1,000 volunteers going door to door, and we had help from the Democrats and the Republicans and the Independents. We had so many volunteers, we had trouble keeping track of them. Many precincts had 4 and 5, 6, 8 workers. People were competing, arguing with each other over who was going to get to do the work.
Well, now the work is over and the waiting begins here in the grand ballroom of the Palmer House. With me is Art Telzer, a former state representative and one of the chief strategists of the Epton campaign. Mr. Telzer, you just heard Phil Walters reporting pollster Pat Cadell's assessment of the large voter turnout and saying it's good for Washington. What do you make of it?
Well, we're very encouraged by the voter turnout. Mr. Lavelle, the chairman of the Board of Election Commissioners, just projected an 88% turnout, which in our judgment is very, very encouraging for Mr. Epton's candidacy. I would say that if that continues to follow up until the polls close, that Bernie Epton will be elected mayor tonight.
Why? Is it the lakefront or some other part of the city?
Well, the lakefront in particular is a constituency where we believe we're going to do very, very well in. We did an awful lot of canvassing, and our people who came back with the results from the precincts gave us extremely encouraging results from those lakefront precincts. And so therefore, our conclusion is that the high voter turnout will be good news for Bernie Epton tonight.
Does that incredible turnout in the black community worry you?
Of course that's a concern, but it's something which we anticipated. We know that's a very motivated constituency. I anticipated, as most of us did, a large voter turnout, and I think we are more than offsetting that turnout in our basic constituency and along the lakefront.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Telzer. Epton will be awaiting the returns in a hotel suite upstairs. The White House is already called to inquire about the telephone number. So even though Bernard Epton didn't want any help from national Republicans during the campaign, it appears that President Reagan will be watching Chicago politics tonight along with all the rest of us. Back to you in the studio, gentlemen.
Thank you, Terry. Coming up, 2 reports on what many political analysts see as key voting blocks in this mayoral election. Phil Ponce on the Hispanic turnout, and I.J. Hudson gets reaction from voters along the city's North Lakefront. Those stories after this.